بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على نبيه الكريم. Last time I promised you that we are going to look in great detail into الطيب صالح's short story, A Handful of Dates, which has been taken from his book The Wedding of Zayn. Now we are going to look into the elements of this story in great details. I want you to remember that each element in a story, whether it is a plot, conflict, setting, time, imagery, symbolism, or characters, they add to the meaning and theme of the story. They are sometimes inseparable, interconnected, all these elements. Let us begin with the plot. The plot here is not only a sequence of events, but they imply strong meaning and the relationship between these events. The other element that we must look into any story is what we call the conflict. Here the conflict external and internal. We have to identify the key events in the story in order to arrive at the conflict. In this particular story, A Handful of Dates, the conflict is between the grandfather and the child. It is between the child himself, because we said the conflict might be internal. At the beginning, remember, he said, I loved my grandfather. Then he began to hate him. Right. So the conflict in this story is between morals. The grandfather is a greedy man. And Mas'ud there is an indolent man. He does not work. When the grandfather came to this village, he did not own a single faddan. He is very greedy. He is going to buy all the land and the palm trees of Mas'ud. Now, let us look at the place and time. We said the story is written in the northern province of Sudan. The place, time, social and physical environment point to the whole environment. The point of view in this story, Handful of Dates, comes from the narrator, from الطيب صالح himself. That we learn what is happening in the story from the narrator. Sometimes the الطيب صالح gives us a flashback, or what we call a flash look. He goes back. When he told us this story, or when he wrote this story, of course, he was a mature man. He's telling the story when he was a child. Remember the first line in the story, he says, I don't remember how old I was when this happened. So this, we learn what is happening in this story from the narrator's point of view. Now, he refers to the collection and images in this story. Most images are created through words that appeal to the reader, senses, sound, light, taste, smell. Remember, Mas'ud did not eat dates with the others. He smelled them. He took dates and began to smell them. Here the words carry suggestive meaning in addition to the literal meaning. Remember when the grandfather said women, when his grandchild asked him why he hated Mas'ud, he said Mas'ud wasted his money on women. He said it in such a way that the child felt as if women was a bad word. Now remember that the grandfather fell asleep when the merchants and Mas'ud were busy here weighing the dates. The palm trees for Mas'ud were living things, experiencing joy and sufferings. This refers to the attitude of the people in the northern province toward their land and their trees. These things are conveyed through the author's uses. Right, the tune of telling the story, again, adds to the theme of the story. Remember when the child ate the dates that his grandfather gave him, he felt that his father gave him something that is not his. That is why he wanted to spew it, to get it out of his stomach. He felt guilty of eating somebody else. He sympathized with Mas'ud. Remember again, at the beginning, see the conflict here. When he said, I loved my grandfather, and he always went with his grandfather, not with his father. At the end of the story, he began to hate his grandfather. Why? He might be sarcastic. Now he is bitter about the behavior of his grandfather, because his grandfather intends to buy the rest of Mas'ud's land and palm trees. Now we are going to look at the character in this story. Characters, this is a very important element, because writers of a story directly tell readers what a character is, or they might tell you indirectly. They might suggest from their words, from their behavior. In order to identify character traits, character behavior, or motivation, you have to go into the causes and their words or their actions. Character in this story, A Handful of Days, is revealed, is shown to us by what he does or says, by how he thinks and what he thinks of, by what other people say about him and think about him, and how they react to this character. This is also revealed by the changes that happen to the person and by the choices of words. Remember, the father is keen to buy the whole land of Mas'ud, that he has this bad intention. Mas'ud, or sometimes it's emphasized with him, we say poor Mas'ud has nothing to say. He is married to 3 wives. The merchants again are keen to come and take their dates. When the grandfather took the 5 sacks of dates, he reminded Mas'ud that he wanted 50 pounds from him. We will talk about this later. This is very important. The grandfather is a very greedy man, and that is why his child or his grandchild began to change. The change here is in the character of the grandchild. Perhaps Tayyib Saleh wants to tell us that this is not religious. This is not part of Islam. Just to be greedy, only to run after others' possessions. And the story has this religious element. Remember, the child began to go to the mosque. The grandfather went into the morning prayers. At the end, the child wanted to spew out the days that he has eaten. Why? Because he feels that the days are not his grandfather's. Remember, this kind of greediness, which we find in the grandfather, we do not find it in the child. Right, let me move to another point. What is the theme of this story? The theme of this story is very deep, in fact. It is one can call it, some critics call it a religious story. And the environment is religious. Right, the theme of this story might be religious, might be moral. It tells us that we should not look for others' possessions. It might tell us that it is bad to run after such people, indolent people who do not work hard, who want to sell their land, their palm trees, just for women. Again, one cannot exempt Mas'ud from the blame. Mas'ud inherited 100 faddans from his father. He squandered all his money by getting married to many women. What is the point of getting married when you waste your land and your money? All these are lessons, or we can call it the theme of the story. Right, here I'm going to stop here. And when you read this story, go and answer the question at the end of the story, and you might find some language questions which are very useful. Again, I want you to remember to compare, when you read the story in Arabic, compare the translation of this story, and it might tell you how translation can spoil the real story. Because there are certain expressions in one language that you will never ever find an equivalent to them. For example, the word spewed. I'm sure that Tayyib Saleh used the word, I put my finger into my throat. He just put it like that. He put his finger where? How far did he put it in his throat? There are so many expressions in Arabic that we never find equivalent to them in English. Okay? Right. Thank you very much. And then I come to the end of this kind of discussion. Right. After every short story, we have questions. Comprehension questions and language questions. And because we are familiar with this story, because we can read it in Arabic, we want to take the questions in this story as example. How do we answer these questions? For example, these are direct questions, comprehension questions. Where does the story take place? The answer is in the northern province of Sudan. How old was Al-Tayyib Saleh when he wrote this story? He said that I can't remember how old I was. We guess that he is less than 5 years old, because usually after 5 years we can remember all events. Now look at question 3. How old was Al-Tayyib Saleh when the story took place? The story took place at the same age, because he is telling this story as a child. Now look at question 4. What was the strange thing when he was young? The strange thing was that he never accompanied his father. We always saw him with his grandfather. He went with his grandfather to the mosque. Question 5. What was the difference between him and the other children? In fact, Al-Tayyib Saleh dwells upon this. The difference is that he was quick at learning the Quran. He was good at reciting it. That is why he was loved by the sheikh of the Khalwa. He was loved by his grandfather. And he is telling us that he was more intelligent than his cousins. That is why his grandfather preferred him to his other cousins. Now question 6. How was he rewarded reciting the Holy Quran? And this is very common in Sudan. When a child does a good thing and you want to praise him, or you want to reward him, you pat him on the head, or you give him a pinch on the cheek. And this is very common. You don't do it to old people. Now question 7. What made the narrator the favorite child of the grandfather? First of all, he served his grandfather. Secondly, he was clever. He understood what his grandfather wanted from him. He brought him the water. I laughed when he wanted me to laugh. I was silent when he wanted me to be silent. That's why he was favorite compared to his other cousins. Now look at question 8. How did Mas'ud lose much of his land? He lost most of his land by selling it. Selling it to the grandfather. Why did he sell his land? Because every time he wanted to get married, he married a number of women. And when we come to know him, he has 3 wives. Perhaps he had more than 3 wives. Question 9. How did Mas'ud squander his money? Again, he wasted his money on women. How many sacks of dates did Mas'ud take? Mas'ud took only 5 sacks of dates. Now, the last question. Why did the narrator put his finger into his throat? He tells us that he wanted to get rid of something wrong that he has eaten. The child thinks that the days he had eaten were not his grandfather's. They were not his. So he wanted to get rid of this thing that is not his. Now I move to the language question. These are very important. Why? Because they tell you the difference in expressions. The language question, again, when we read the story, it is not a matter of enjoying the story. We read a story to enhance our language. We add new words, new vocabulary, or new structures. Now the question is, paraphrase the following expressions in your own words. I love to give rein to my imagination. You know the meaning of rein? When you rein a horse, when you rein something, you control it. I love to give rein. Imagine anything I wanted. يطلق سراح لخياله. 2. Picture to myself a tribe of giants. To picture to myself, I imagine. When he went to the river, he imagined that there were giants behind the trees. So he pictured to himself a tribe. Here a tribe means a big number of. 3. Before Allah calls me to him. Right. 3 in the question, before Allah calls me to him, simply means before I die. When Allah calls you to him, that means you die. 4. The heart of the palm. The heart of anything is the center, is the core, is the nucleus. So the heart, that means that gives you life. If you cut the heart of the palm tree, it will die. 5. Lost their way home. Lost their way home. That means they did not find their way straight. Below. Now, examine the manners. Oh, this is a very good question. Examine the manners, customs, rules, and moral codes of the society in which the story is set. Now, this story tells that the people are religious. Again, people are very greedy. They want to own land, palm trees. Again, people love their trees, they love their land. Now, compare and contrast the characters of the story. The boy, the grandfather, and Mas'ud. The boy is very intelligent, very clever, very quick in learning, reciting and learning the Quran. The grandfather is greedy. He wants to earn everything for himself. And Mas'ud is described by the grandfather as indolent. He doesn't work. He just gets married. He has a number of wives. Perhaps we are not told this. We don't know how many children he has. So the difference is great between the grandfather and Mas'ud. The child has his own morals. He believes that his grandfather was wrong. The grandfather wanted to buy the land and the palm trees of Mas'ud. Next, describe the author's attitude towards each of the major characters in the story. The major characters in the story are Mas'ud and the grandfather. And the child sympathizes with Mas'ud. I wanted to touch the edge of his garment. He loves his grandfather because he is kiss and kin. Now he began to hate him because he knew his grandfather was wrong. Now, what is the theme of the story? This is the last point. The story gives us a number of themes and lessons. One of them is religious. Then you must have some kind of morals, ethics. Don't think of other people's possessions. Okay? And finally, the story is told from the point of view of a child. What do you think of this point of view when he is older? At-Tayyib Saleh wanted to tell us that he believes in these lessons. He believes in this theme. Always be good to others, sympathize with others. Right. We have seen these questions, whether they are comprehension or whether they are language questions. They again elaborate on the theme, the character, the plot, the conflict of the story. And whenever you have such questions at the end of every story we have, please try to answer these questions the way we answer these questions. Now we come to the end of this story, and we meet again, inshallah, in a different story. Remember that this story is written in Arabic. And we call this literature in translation. Right, and we meet again in a story written in English. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Remember, the story is called A Handful of Dates. And it is taken from the book The Wedding of Zayn. Wassalamu alaikum.